all you want me to be. Perfect one. It's so easy to see why I push you away. With heaven inside my heart and hell in front of me. Oh, I walk the endless miles to where I need to be, and it's all the same. We're holding out for change.
Hi everybody, this is Richard Sachs, your host on Lost Arts Radio. This is our show for Sunday, the 3rd day of September already, 2017, and I like to be able to get guests back on that our listeners are requesting to hear from again, and that's definitely the case with Al Whitney, who we have the pleasure of talking with tonight, and we're going to go over a lot of really interesting stuff that all ties together. If you don't remember, she's got a extremely educational site that's full of important information called anticorruptionsociety.com, anticorruptionsociety.com. A lot to learn on that site, a lot of really good information. I'm benefiting from it, definitely. So we're going to talk about everything related to that, and since most of our regular listeners know everything is related, then, hard to tell what direction we'll go. It's all unscripted and spontaneous, so should be interesting. Welcome, Alan. Thank you for giving us some of your time. I appreciate it.
Oh, I'm glad to do it. I'm glad to share the information.
Yeah.
The smarter we get, the better we're going to be able to protect ourselves, don't you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. So, starting with the theme of the Anti-Corruption Society, if I understand it, the theme is that government working in partnership with corporations and actually becoming a corporation itself has become corrupted, meaning it's not working for the people it's supposed to be serving, which was its only justification to exist, and it's working for other interests now. So how did that actually happen? I mean, since in America at least, the theory was that it would only be allowed to exist with the consent of the governed. So what happened?
Well, there's a debate as to when it happened. Some people say it happened with the Reconstruction Act right at the Civil War, whereas there was a debt, which was the Civil War, and the banksters were going to get their repayment, and were going to help this government recover the Civil War. But to do that, one of their conditions was the federal government had to be a corporation. So
there was a debt to whom? Sorry to interrupt, but I want to clarify that.
Well, apparently the bankers paid for part of that war. I am not clear on who paid for what.
Okay, because there wasn't a central bank at that time, was there?
That's right. But the money for the war had to come from somewhere, and
so did they just make up the money that they had, or did they actually have some kind of money to lend for that?
I'm not sure exactly how the money changed hands. A lot of people said that Lincoln wanted to fund the northern, the northern troops, the North, and he started the greenbacks.
Right.
Okay, but now who was paying to fund the activities in the South? There are so many people who say the Rothschilds wanted this war. The Rothschilds instigated the war, and it had to do with commerce, and it had to do with wanting to come in to control the cotton, really the commerce. They wanted to be involved in the commerce that was going on, and it was growing. I mean, we had lots of resources in the country at that time, if you recall. Mm-hmm. So they wanted their hand in that whole thing. And I have not done as much time on what happened in the Civil War as many others. I have focused more on what happened in 1933. However, a federal corporation was created. The 14th Amendment was passed. The people of the states and that means the Ohioans or the Pennsylvanians. All of those people, by the 14th Amendment, were made citizens of the federal government, and at the time, they were not. Up until then, they were citizens of their own states.
So was the emergence of the 14th Amendment, was that when the corporation originally formed?
That's what a lot of people say. Now, I have not studied that. That is, however, when we were made 14th Amendment citizens of the federal government. Before then, some of us were North Carolinians, some of us were, Ohioans. In other words, we had an allegiance to our state.
So most people would think becoming a citizen to the United States is normal because, you live in that country, so obviously you're a citizen of it. What could possibly be the problem with that?
Well, except that was the creation of the citizen personhood. In other words, now everyone was made a citizen of the federal corporation. A wonderful researcher by the name of Tom DiLorenzo, and he's given quite a few talks. I featured some of his work on my website. He talks about exactly the Civil War ended the Constitution. From his point of view, the Constitution was nullified at the time of the Civil War because up until then, the Federation of Nations, the different states, had the right to nullify federal laws. And the 10th Amendment, I think a lot of people have heard about that. The states had reserved all rights, except the few rights that they had given the federal corporation, the federal government.
Right, so the 10th Amendment is the one that says anything that's not a specific right of the federal government, it can't do, and it belongs to the states or the people, right?
Correct. Okay. And now Tom Lorenzo's research said when Nixon went in and trashed the South and destroyed and burnt Atlanta to the ground, and then to get the 14th Amendment signed, if you do your research, you will find a lot of shenanigans went on. In fact, men were threatened. Some elected officials were not allowed back into Congress because they didn't agree with it.
You mean when Lincoln went in and did that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So at the Reconstruction and the 14th Amendment, basically the states' rights were destroyed. And that's what we see today. You don't see, very infrequently do you see the state standing up against the federal corporation. Some have tried it. The last one I heard about was Texas, when Texas said they weren't going to let TSA in their state. Mm-hmm. And the federal government said that's fine, and we run the airplanes, and we just won't let any planes land in your state.
Yeah, they said they would have a no-fly zone just like Obama administration did over Libya.
Exactly. So what does that tell you? Up until the Civil War, the states could vote to nullify an action of the federal government, of the Congress, and say, well, you can do that, but we're not going to adopt it. At that point, after this horrific war, and it was indeed horrific, they stopped challenging. That was the end of the states truly being able to challenge the federal government. They have fallen in line ever since. So now you've got this new corporation, okay, and this corporate structure that was formed after the Civil War. Now, there are many people who say it was there before. I haven't focused as much on that. I am more concerned, and people who've listened to me kind of know this about me. I'm more concerned about what happened after the Federal Reserve came in, the passage of the Federal Reserve Act, and then what happened in 1933 when they bankrupted the federal corporation, brought in the Federal Reserve Note and changed everything. Everything. That was like their coup d'etat, was the bankruptcy of 33 and the New Deal.
Okay.
So when the New Deal came in, at that time, they wanted to pass the Social Security Act, and there was a big constitutional fight over that. Because now the federal government was government corporation was going to tell the states that everyone had to register for Social Security. Mm-hmm. So that is a federal registration program, right?
Right, and they, if I remember, they had a rule at that time that it could never be used for identification purposes or for anything other than getting your Social Security money.
Correct. Now, there was a challenge at that point. In fact, when they passed the Social Security Act in 1935, according to Tom DiLorenzo, and he's fascinating, he's on LouRockwell.com, and you can just type in Tom DiLorenzo, DiLorenzo. He has a lot of information about this period, okay? He's been doing a lot of research, and he says the Constitution had to be destroyed because of the banking system, and he's absolutely right. So in comes the Federal Reserve Act in 1935, and right away there were constitutional lawyers who says you can't do this. You know, you cannot force people to register with you, to sign up. Mm-hmm. Roosevelt, that was important that he got that passed. That's why he was put in position. And there was this challenge, and in 1937, he stacked enough people in the Supreme Court that the challenge was defeated, and it was now considered constitutional, the Social Security Act. Prior to then, there was many challenges. In fact, a wonderful author, Fred Waddell, wrote a book called Woe Unto You Lawyers. His book was published in 1937, and it's so interesting because he's got a take on what was going on. He was a law professor, and he said exactly that the New Deal by FDR, all of a sudden, what was considered unconstitutional one day was determined by a bunch of gentlemen in black robes to be constitutional the next day. So a lot of lawyers knew that something had gone down, knew that this was not constitutional, and were actually in shock and didn't know what to do about it. And he's one of them.
Okay, and the event that you're referring to is the beginning of the Social Security registration where everybody had to sign up.
That's right. Well, and it's a lot of things happened when Roosevelt came in his New Deal. He confiscated the gold, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To confiscate the gold, there was no constitutional way at the time to do that, so they had to claim that the American people were hoarding gold. And then they decided to apply the 1917 Trading with the Enemy Act. They made that applicable to United States citizens.
What was the rationale for that? Do you know?
Yeah, because they wanted to remove all the gold and replace it with Federal Reserve notes.
No, I mean, I know the reason that they really wanted to like that, but I mean the justification that they told people publicly.
They said the Federal Reserve people claimed that the American people were hoarding gold. Now, Eugene Snyder has written a lot about this, and I could send you a link. I'm trying to remember the name of the work. He really did study how they made us enemies of the state. Now, he claims that the people during the Great Depression had been storing their gold with Federal Reserve banks. That at that time, before the Great Depression, it was considered a safe place to store your gold. Then when the Great Depression hit and people were coming in to get their gold to survive, there was a run, and the gold was not there. The gold had already been shipped out of the country, according to Louis McFadden, so that when the people came for the gold wasn't there. So they had to cover themselves, and that's what they did. They claimed that the people were hoarding gold.
Isn't that strange how a word like that has such an emotional context to it? And mostly people have no idea why they think it's an important word. They just say, oh, hoarding, that we know that's terrible. But
right.
What hoarding actually means is saving up something that you need for something.
Exactly.
It's not totally evil.
Exactly. And according to Eugene Snyder, that is the same old story that we've all been familiar with the goldsmith and the little pieces of paper and how they circulate all these pieces of paper and they would store people's gold, and everything fell apart when everybody wanted their gold at the same time.
Yeah,
well,
because the goldsmiths didn't actually keep it there. They
exactly.
did other things with it.
And according to Eugene Snyder, that is exactly what happened. They had moved the gold out of the country. The people wanted their gold. There was no gold for the people, so they accused the population of hoarding gold, and they made them enemy of the state and required that they turn in their gold or go to jail. So that was the confiscation of the people's gold, and that was the end of the gold-backed dollar, basically, when it comes to reality. And we ended up with the New Deal Federal Reserve note, and which has been in place ever since. And by the way, for your listeners who haven't given it a lot of thought, the Federal Reserve is private. It's a private cartel, right? Their note is a private scrip.
Which is, basically a promissory note that will pay you at some undetermined time.
Exactly, but it is not the currency of a sovereign nation.
Yeah. In fact, isn't the Federal Reserve Corporation mostly foreign owned?
Yes, it is. So we are not using a sovereign currency. We are using a private currency of the private cartel called the Federal Reserve.
And what does the Constitution say about what kind of money to use?
Silver and gold coin, and I think Ron Paul has made this point many, 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 many times, that the passage of the Federal Reserve Act was unconstitutional.
Yeah, I guess one question that brings up is, okay, all these things are unconstitutional, but what are the penalties for not obeying the Constitution?
Well, okay, what they did, to do what they did in 1933, they had to get Congress to admit, to give the president exceptional power during a national emergency. And they did indeed that. And it wasn't just to FDR. They gave it to the office of the president. So by giving him emergency powers, that allowed the normal constitutional process to be suspended, and it was.
Okay.
And anybody who doubts that, all you have to do is look up Senate Report 93549, and you can find it on anticorruptionsociety.com. If you go on the tab at the top that says Source Documents, scroll down. We've got like 3 versions. One is a version that you can print out and hand to people. It's only 2 pages. We've got a second version, which is easy to read. It's the whole Senate report that was, again, done in 1973. The third is a copy of the original that's in the record. And basically, in 1973, they exposed the fact that the country had been in a state of national emergency since 1933, giving the executive branch extraordinary power. And it's still there.
Are there any documents that anybody can find on the bankruptcy itself? I know that's been really mysterious, according to a lot of people.
I haven't found one. In fact, one of my consultants, or I call them fellows. These are the people I talk to about these legal issues. I have a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
One of them told me, he lives in California. He spent 6 months. He went to law libraries. He spent months trying to find the actual terms of the bankruptcy, and was unable to do so. Now, according to Barefoot's World, their wonderful article called Who's Running America, they claim that the volume, this happened in Geneva, Switzerland, the volume that contained all of the details of this bankruptcy has disappeared. So nobody really knows what was agreed to.
Okay, that's interesting. Or nobody in the public, anyway.
Nobody I know. Now, somebody may, but I don't even remember Eustace Mullins mentioning it. So, and he was with the Library of Congress.
Right, right. Yeah, it's pretty interesting because I doubt that the people in control of that agreement would just let it not be remembered.
Correct. And if you talk to most lawyers, they don't acknowledge this permanent state of national emergency. What was so interesting is I made that 2-copy page for my husband, one on the front, and it's again on the source document, it's called the excerpts. One on the front shows when the Senate report was prepared, by whom, what Congress, what it was submitted. Excuse me. And on the back, we have excerpts. And he took it to a senior citizens meeting where there were quite a few attorneys. Mm-hmm. He showed it to one guy and he says, yep, that's true. I know about it, but it seems like nobody cares about it. Nobody ever talks about it.
Right.
And another lawyer said, oh, that doesn't mean anything.
Which means that he has no idea what it's about, basically.
Or he does, and
he completely does. Yeah.
Yes. It doesn't mean anything. Are you kidding me? It means everything. If people would look at that, and they would take it super duper seriously, when you look at the group, the team that they put together to do that research, the number of statutes they examined, it's truly impressive. The original is like 666 pages. They examined thousands of statutes and came up with the conclusion that the country is being run through executive power, and that when this legislation passed in 1933, in that report, they admit that Congress had one copy to look at, and they were given an hour to look at it before they were called upon to vote. And
wow.
That's
like PPP or something like that.
Yeah, doesn't it sound like the Patriot Act?
Yeah, like a lot of those things that Congress is just given a special favor to be able to glance at it for a minute before they vote, and they're told what to vote.
Exactly. And that's how this thing got passed. And the Senate Report 93549 claims that, in conclusion, there's no way for Congress to end the permanent state of national emergency. That has to be done by the executive branch. Which we have not had a president willing to do that.
To give up their own power, in other words.
Exactly. And restore it to Congress where it should be.
Yeah. So if that's accurate, that means Congress is just putting on a show.
Exactly. Now you know why, when they have these hearings, and for those who listen to them, and I've listened to many, now you know why they have these hearings, and nothing changes. Nothing changes.
I mean, most of the people, the Congress people who are sitting around in the room, don't really look like they're even listening to whoever's talking.
They had a hearing on fluoride in 1996. They had members of the EPA testifying of the problems with fluoride in 1996. Mm-hmm. Nothing changed. The CDC still recommends fluoride. Right. The laws are still in place to insist on fluoride. Mm-hmm. Nothing changed. They also had a hearing on the CDC and how they waste money, and they made these recommendations that they be held more fiscally accountable. Nothing changed. What's
the mechanism to prevent change that's in place?
They can't overcome the executive branch. They can't overcome what the agencies do.
What happens if they had voted for a law to ban fluoride on that day that you're talking about?
The executive could have vetoed it, and would have. Okay.
But mostly they don't even go to the trouble of suggesting.
No. And you find very few times when there's going to be a real battle between the agency network and the Congress. It just almost never happens. In fact, when it came to fluoride, there was a wonderful PhD researcher, Dr. Yamianis, I believe was his name, and he won a case in Pennsylvania in the 80s, He actually won a case in court where he convinced the judge that water fluoridation was putting poison in the water. And he's a brilliant man, did an excellent job. And
Isn't it funny that that's considered a tremendous accomplishment where any third grader who still had common sense would know that immediately?
Oh, yeah. So the judge found in favor of him and absolutely agreed that the people in Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania, should stop fluoridating the water. The judge was overruled by the federal regulatory system. See, under the permanent state of national emergency, no local court can challenge these federal regulations successfully, and they don't, because it's an emergency. You don't see these courts challenging Homeland Security policies, do you?
So the Constitution's going to be returned to us any day now. It's just they're finishing up the last bits of this emergency.
Yeah.
Okay. What a relief. That's much better.
Yeah. So while they did all this, because again, state of emergency, now they converted during this state of emergency, they converted everything into uniform commercial code. And to trick everybody and to trick the public, they did so by citing the Commerce Clause of the Constitution. Now, Judge Napolitano, which some of your listeners may be familiar with, he is fairly smart, and he is absolutely an advocate for constitutional law, but he admits that they're doing everything under the Commerce Clause.
Now, is that the clause in the Constitution that says that the federal government can do what they need to regulate interstate commerce?
Yes, and if you don't mind, I can read to you, because I thought this was a wonderful excerpt. Even though it came from Wikipedia, it is absolutely accurate, and this demonstrates that the powers that be are willing to put this much information into the public, or it would have been removed. Okay, so they're willing to admit to this, and Judge Napolitano, I'm sure, would concur. This is what it says. The Commerce Clause describes an enumerated power listed in the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. The clause states that the United States Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. Dispute exists within the courts as to the range of powers granted to Congress by the Commerce Clause. As noted below, the clause is often paired with the necessary and proper clause, the combination used to take a broad, expansive perspective of these powers. During the post-1937 era, the use of the Commerce Clause by Congress to authorize federal control of economic matters became effectively unlimited. So what is the definition of commerce then? According to this piece, and I think we can find this pretty much everywhere, I think this is probably a well-accepted definition. Commerce is a term which means all of the activities which start from production and end at consumption. The system includes legal, economic, political, social, cultural, and technological systems that are in operation in any country or internationally, unquote. Now you know why when you listen to MSNBC and they're talking about health care and healthcare, quote, providers, unquote, they refer to us as healthcare consumers.
Right.
Not patients, not customers. We are considered healthcare consumers. You hear it all the time. We are.
Is that because it fits into the Commerce Clause terminology?
Yes.
Okay.
Healthcare is right there into the Commerce Clause. I could go into the red flag rules and how they did that. But yes, it is in commerce. So you go into a hospital for healthcare and you are right smack in the middle of commerce.
So isn't it funny that people are so worried about what would happen if we ever had martial law? And actually what we've got is a version of martial law, but it's executive branch law, but it's not really from the executive branch. It's from the higher levels of the controllers, right? Because if the actual president goes against it, then they just overrule him too.
That's correct. It's from the money monsters. Mm-hmm. Because it's all about money. It's some people call them the Mammonites. It's all about money, and that's what commerce is, isn't it? It's exchange of money for goods and services. Yeah. So, well, you and I, occasionally I'll go to the grocery store, and I guess I could consider that commerce, but for the most part, commerce is very little a part of my life. I mean, I have my family, I have the garden, I have, my little websites, and I don't get any money for them. So I'm not engaged in commerce, but yeah, in their world, we're all engaged in commerce.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you go get some tomato seeds for your garden, then that's commerce, right?
That's correct. In other words, they think that our whole world is commerce. And you and I think our whole world is life, mm-hmm. and living and people and family and pets and friends and all kinds of wonderful things that have nothing to do with commerce. But see, because they control money, they think it's all commerce.
Right. Okay. All right. So what's happened is a transition from at least an attempt to have a government, which originally was not a corporation. It was just, in America, it was people holding offices that were trying to execute and, preserve and defend and use the Constitution.
Yeah, it was a confederation, right? A confederation of states.
Yeah, but they made a separate entity that had certain powers over the states for their protection with their consent.
Correct.
And it's like informed consent of the states, basically.
Correct. And when they got him back into the constitutional compact, there were people who said that the controllers were right there at those meetings. In fact, Tom DiLorenzo is one of them. And there was a lot of battles going on behind the scene about states' rights versus federal rights. And Jefferson, apparently, during the debates and the discussion, again, this is coming from Tom DiLorenzo. I advise everybody read his work. He's done such a dynamite job. Jefferson wanted the states to keep power. He didn't want a central government, all-powerful central government.
Right.
Alexander Hamilton, who was an agent for the Rothschilds, from everything I've gathered, was pushing for this central control. Mm-hmm. So that argument was right there in the very, very beginning. The money monsters wanted control over this new country, and people like Jefferson wanted the states to have rights.
Right. Yeah, and I think they agreed that they needed some kind of central government because there were things that they weren't being able to accomplish with, no empowered central government. And if they hadn't had one at all, they would have been a lot easier for a large foreign power to overcome. But it would only work if the people in it had incredible character and didn't get corrupted, right?
And limited the power that the federal corporation exerted. And
yeah, obviously
the bankers wanted to be able to put the whole country in debt, which they did with World War I, right? As soon as the Federal Reserve Act passed, then off to war we were, and they got the whole country into debt, which is their game, right?
Why did the government, the federal government, have to become incorporated at all?
Well, the banksters need contract law. And you'll see right now treaties and contracts that are going on between different governments. They need their lawyers to write out the rules and have everybody sign on to a contract, then they need a military force to enforce the contract. Now, as long as their lawyers can create the contract, and people may not be aware of this, Melvin Stamper, who was an attorney, who wrote a wonderful book that I recommend to everyone called Fruit from a Poisonous Tree, okay? Mm-hmm. He was a law professor. He worked for the government. Apparently, he did some work for the CIA. He smelled a rat, and he started doing his own research and wrote that fabulous book, Fruit from a Poisonous Tree. And in it, he said the bankers needed contract law to be superior to any other form of law.
Does that require that you're dealing only with corporations?
Yeah, see, corporations can't function outside of contract law, right? Because they're not real. I mean, they're just words on a piece of paper, so they have to have written words. They can't do a handshake. So
how would unincorporated humans not be subject to their law?
That was their problem, is that there is an old law, Hammurabi's law of equals, which states, and it's still true today, only equals can contract. Okay. In other words, I can't contract with a squirrel. I can't contract with a 10-year-old. Mm-hmm. I can't contract with a tree. I can only contract with equals. Okay. But now bring in a corporation. And a corporation is a business model with a bunch of rules regarding how it handles business. No corporate charter talks about they will do no harm to living men and women. You will not find that in any corporate charter. Right. It's nothing. It's all about business, which is why these corporations don't even worry about, even big pharma. They don't worry about harming men and women. If they are caught with a product that costs an economic loss to someone, they're happy to pay and go on their way. They don't go to jail.
As long as the net result is a profit, then it's okay.
That's right.
Isn't there also something in law that says that the corporation is responsible to make the maximum money for the shareholders?
Exactly. It's their fiduciary obligation. In fact, if a CEO ignores that, they can remove him from office.
Yeah, and that structure itself, if you really follow the implications of it out, guarantees that corporations on that large scale will destroy the biosphere. Yeah.
Everything. In fact, if your listeners haven't watched that wonderful documentary called The Corporation that was done by a Canadian in 2003, it is online. It's a real education. I mean, it's just an amazing, wonderful education. How much harm and carnage this model causes
across the planet. The whole moral system is maximize profit.
Exactly.
Right? And money isn't bad. It's just that if it's not constrained by whether it does good or harm, then it's complete planetary suicide.
Yes. I call it Ink the Beast.
Okay. Right.
And because it's not a model conducive to life. It's a model conducive to profit above all else.
Yeah, and you can always make more fast profit by destroying things.
Exactly. And then to make matters worse, there are rewards to make money this quarter, and to heck with what happens in 3 years.
Yeah, you can always start a new corporation if this one gets destroyed anyway, right?
And incidentally, that happened in Ohio. We are the home of, I think they said there were 300 Superfund sites where corporations have come in here and left huge toxic waste.
Yeah, because all they have to do is go bankrupt, right?
And that's what they've done. They go bankrupt and they come up under a different name. Yeah. And the public is left with the toxic waste. And they do that all over, all the time.
Right, the government cleans it up for free for you and just takes all the money out of your bank account.
The problem is this particular government hasn't cleaned it up at all.
Yeah, a lot of those haven't been cleaned up for a long time.
Oh, really long time.
the whole idea is that corporations don't have anything to do with that anyway.
Correct.
It's just accounting balances.
They haven't found a way, if they maybe they haven't looked, but they haven't found a way to make them clean up their own messes. And it's unlikely, as long as they're just this corporate business structure, until they go after the CEO, the living men and women who hold the offices, until they go after them and hold them liable.
That would make it harder for the corporations to keep going full speed, because after a while of getting all of the officers put in jail, it might get harder to find new officers to be willing to do that.
Yes, but that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, probably so.
You know?
Interesting.
I mean, one guy did a wonderful cartoon, and it showed a corporation in an electric chair, but it was a crash dummy, and he was covered in corporate logos.
Okay, like a race driver.
Only it was obviously a dummy. It wasn't alive.
Yeah.
And they had him in an electric chair.
Okay. They hadn't figured out that might not work.
No, they did. That was the truth. The truth is, you can put them in an electric chair, but since they're not alive, you can't kill them anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and just to reiterate, there's really nothing wrong with corporations. You could start a corporation and use it for gardening or whatever you wanted, but the problem with corporations is as soon as they get shareholders, then you have a legal obligation to do anything to get them as much money as possible.
Yes, and the problem is that at one time in this country, and I don't know when this all stopped, they would only give a corporation a 20-year charter, and then they would only charter the corporation for one thing. I'm going to make basketballs, or I'm going to make footballs.
Okay. Right.
And if you did not live up to it could not harm the public. It would be to benefit the public. I checked with a lawyer, Ellen Brown, on this, and she said absolutely.
When was that? That sounds pretty unusual.
I think that was probably prior to the 14th Amendment, when they gave them personhood. They used to control them. The states would control them. And if they were bad and they weren't living up to their corporate charter, they were doing things they weren't supposed to do, and they were harming the public, the state could remove their charter and seize their assets.
So that must have been before the state was also corrupted.
I believe so. I think that if, again, it's like maybe the last episode, the last section in the documentary, The Corporation, it talks about a bunch of attorneys who got together in California, and they were going after Unical, and they were going to have the state of California remove their charter and seize their assets because they felt they had proof of the harm and damage that Unical had caused. That did not go forward, and the reason it did not is the Attorney General from the state of California, according to that documentary, well, he admitted he had the authority to do so, to prosecute Unical or to shut them down. He chose not to. So these attorneys were doing the right thing, trying to get the legal system to acknowledge when corporations are bad, they need to have their charter removed, to be shut down, and their assets seized. He was unable to get the Attorney General for the state to do it. So
yeah. I think part of the problem is that no system works if the individuals involved don't have any character.
Well, there's truth to that. But again, you've got a legal system that's sort of semi-hidden, don't you think? So it could be that they didn't file the right paperwork and they were just, ignorance of the law is no excuse.
It could be, but the easiest way for the bad guys to make sure they were safe is just infiltrate the regulatory agencies and the courts.
Or bribe the Attorney General.
Or bribe them, yeah.
They could do that, or they could threaten him.
Yeah, bribes and threats. I think that's how they run Congress now.
Yeah, they do.
Blackmail and bribes.
Yeah, they do. But anyway, so we come up to 1933, and then under the national emergency, they brought in the Uniform Commercial Code across the country. And by the 50s or 60s, all the states had adopted this statutory system of law called the UCC. This is private international law. Now, I'm sure they convinced them that for interstate commerce, we all need to have the same law, or you have different rules for different states. And oh, well, we couldn't have that. It had to be uniform.
Right, right.
And that's the game, that's the song and dance they sold them all. So they brought in the UCC and redefined, like in California, I think I mentioned before, we located where prior to these moments, and I can't find the date of that, the statutes in California were written for men. However, they changed the statute saying from here on forward, anytime you amend a statute or change a statute or put in a new statute, you are to remove the word man and put in the word person.
Which and most people would think was, oh, that's very nice. It includes kids and women and men.
Right.
Because they're all people.
That's right. And to me, the best kept secret of the legal profession is what we've exposed, is what exactly a person is. And you ask a lawyer about that, and they just sidestep it and say that's unimportant. I mean, I have cornered them and said, well, look at this definition. How can this be living men and women? And the response I got is, you don't understand the law.
Yeah, exactly. You're not even a lawyer, so
you're not a lawyer, so you don't understand. Right. And I don't have time to explain it to you anyway. So there.
Exactly, and you wouldn't understand the language if I did.
Right. Like I wouldn't know the difference between the term a business trust, a corporation, an estate.
No.
And a living man. I can't discern the difference between that. I think I can.
At some point, wasn't the law system intended to be used by regular people instead of just lawyers?
I think it might have been. I think maybe Jefferson had that in mind. In fact, one of my consultants that I work with said that before they took over the educational system, that must have been like in the 1800s, late 1800s, our schools were teaching the children in class about the federal government and how to protect their rights. That was part of what they might have called civics, is to teach them how to keep this monster at bay and what their rights were, teaching them what their rights were.
Yeah, now kids nowadays wouldn't even know what the word civics meant.
No, because they don't teach it. Then when the robber barons took over the educational system, they started controlling the curriculum, and teaching children how to stand up to this was not a part of what they wanted done. And it's still not being done, right?
Right. That's true. No, it's just the opposite.
It's just the opposite. So people, when I tell people that you're signing an agreement, you are agreeing to this. When you sign your signature without restricting it, you are agreeing to all of the nonsense of UCC, and you don't even know it. Mm-hmm. And they just can't believe it. And the first thing they do is they run off to their lawyer, and they say, well, this lady said this. That can't be true. And the lawyer says, oh, no, it's not true. She doesn't know what she's talking about.
Right. Everything's fine.
But that's the same thing happening in medicine, isn't it, Richard? I mean, the same thing when you try to tell people about antibiotics or something, and you have a family member who runs off to the doctor and says, Richard says this about antibiotics, and the doctor will say, well, Richard doesn't know what he's talking about.
Exactly. No, we had a guest on, a nurse last week, that said there are certain slogans that doctors learn when they're in medical school, and to deal with exactly situations like that, where somebody says, well, my child just got vaccinated and they died 2 hours later, and the doctor is supposed to say, just repeat this mantra. It has 3 words: true, unrelated.
Oh, wow.
And you memorize that.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. But but you use very long words and you have a certain costume, and everybody is just, worshiping you.
Well, and I call them the priests of medicine and law.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we have, this new religions.
And these priests of medicine and law are causing us untold harm on a daily basis. They're educated to think that they're brilliant and they're special, and we're dumb.
Yeah, the people are going to be really irritating and ask you unscientific questions, and you have to be able to deal with them.
I mean, I even put on my website a Harvard doctor who gets a lot of media coverage, gave a talk at MIT, I think it was in 2016, their graduating class. And it's really quite interesting, the garbage he put out there. And he said, people say vaccines cause harm, and that's not true. People say climate change isn't real, and that's not true. And he goes on in his address to the graduating class and says, some of my smartest patients challenge our science, which just shows how much harder we're going to have to work to regain people's faith in science.
Yes, re-education comes to mind.
And you think, I'm just thinking, well, if your smartest patients are challenging you, maybe you ought to wonder.
Yeah.
If they know something that you don't know.
Well, so when I was first talking to you about all this stuff recently, and the fact that corruption has led to complete takeover and cooperation between corporations and government against the population. People might have said, well, that just means there's nothing we can do about it. But now there are things happening that we're going to have to try to do something about it, because what they're planning to do next is not good. And one of those things that you brought up is as horrible as the forced vaccination of children is, with California leading the way and the rest of the states planning to follow. They're now planning to do forced vaccination with all the adults too, and they're not going to wait for the cashless society to enforce that, right?
Well, I don't know what they're going to do. It's hard to predict. I was told in 2009 that the dollar would crash the following weekend on Thanksgiving by
Yeah, I've heard stuff like that too.
international forecaster. I mean, this guy, Bob Chapman, everybody loved him. He was brilliant. He was honest. And he said, this is it, people. It's going to happen this weekend. And I ran up and said to my husband, we have to take our money out. It's going to crash this weekend. And he's looking at me like, I don't think so. And
You're
I'm
right.
like, yes, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Well, it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I haven't really ever recovered that.
Yeah, no, I understand. We don't know those things for sure.
Yeah.
But the vaccination thing is one thing that's moving forward so far pretty steadily.
Yes.
And at least with respect to targeting children,
Right.
there are laws being presented in states all over the place, and they're taking away exemptions
Right.
for philosophical and religious reasons.
That's correct.
It's happening worldwide. I mean, there are big protests in Italy and France about the new mandates that are happening now. Italy now and France next year. And they have enough money to be a pretty big campaign.
And that goes back to the money monsters and their treaties and their agreements. I mean, this is what they do. They get into the United Nations charters and everybody signs up for this or signs up for that. And then they say the World Health Organization will provide you funds for this, that, and the other. And here's the conditions of the agreement.
Right.
And the conditions are you have to vaccinate your population. And
yeah, I mean, what could be wrong with that? That just makes sure nobody will ever get sick. So it's great.
yeah, and they feed them a bunch of lies about vaccines. And what can I say? This is all commerce. Look at how much money Big Pharma will make if they can get the whole planet vaccinated. I mean, geez, unlimited. And then the sickness, how much money they're going to make off of all that illness.
Yeah, it's going to be great. It's what the Tom Wheeler, the ex-head of the Federal Communications Commission, said that the rollout of the 5G system, putting a transmitter outside everybody's house, is going to generate a huge amount of what he called economic activity. That means profit for the industry. And
Right.
that is like the top priority of anything, so there can't be any objections.
Correct. I mean, that's
Right to what
right.
you said about corporations.
Yeah, and the more of society worships mammon, the worse we're going to get. I mean, at some point, we have to say money isn't everything.
Well, and besides, money is great as long as you don't get it by hurting people.
Right.
Because money can get a lot of really neat things that are good.
Yeah.
And there's no reason that you should have to make your profits by killing people. I mean, doesn't really make sense.
Well, a part of what happened, and this, I listened to a wonderful interview by Alex Abila, who worked with Rand for many years, and he wanted to do kind of a history of Rand, and they said he could. And he wrote a book, I believe it's called The Age of Reason. His name is Alex Abela, Abella, and he was a Cuban. I think he's still alive. You can type in YouTube and his name, and you'll find interviews that he did promoting his book. But he admitted that in the 60s, Rand Corporation was using their think tanks, of course, to do social engineering. Mm-hmm. And they needed a system where money was everything, and altruism and patriotism were a problem for the system they wanted to put in place. So they had to influence industry. They had to influence the military and industrial complex. They had to influence universities, and they did. The Rand Corporation sent people out everywhere. And Alex claims that we're all bastard children of Rand Corporation because this big project of social engineering to make money and competition all important to all of us was necessary for them to keep this system going and keep it expanding. And altruism, which would mean I give of myself, I use random acts of kindness, I let you borrow my car, I give you money when you're down and out, all of that is undesirable to their system.
So their engineering has been very successful.
Yes, it has. It has.
Because most of the people that are doing really well are into the corporate mentality.
Exactly.
And a lot of where the really high-paying jobs are is mostly in some aspect of world destruction.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the people who aren't as successful, but they're working, most of them that have good jobs are working for some of those people that are doing completely destructive things. And they hate their jobs.
Exactly. And that was all created by design.
Right.
And that makes it so hard because even the people you know and like and trust have gone through this educational system, they've gone through the university system. They think how many people believe success is defined by wealth? Way too many, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, those words are used synonymously, pretty much.
Yeah. Yes, if you can acquire wealth, you're successful, and nobody wants to ask you too much about how you got it.
Yeah, exactly. So what have you found how this ties into what's called transhumanism and Agenda 21?
Well, Agenda 21 is I don't always put transhumanism and Agenda 21 together, okay? Because when I was reading about Agenda 21 and how it had been changed to Agenda 30.
2030, right.
2030. The article that I read quoted some promoters of this program as saying that we need everybody on the planet to have a birth certificate. Okay? And then we need a uniform rule of law. Well, if you look at what you and I have been talking about tonight and the previous time, you will see that giving every living being on the planet a birth certificate and then implementing uniform commercial code on all these birth certificates, well, that's exactly what they want. now with their computers and the birth certificate and the social security number, they have been for quite a while, and they still are, giving a value to each human, a numerical value, value added. So, well, we look at our family, they're living beings and they're priceless and they're precious, and we don't put a numerical value on I don't even put a numerical value on my dog.
Right.
But when you control money and you control commerce, you have to have a numerical value on everything.
So what do they do with a numerical value on people?
Well, they decide, value added. Is this person worth some of what they claim is happening in Obamacare is when you reach a certain age, it's not a good investment to.
Oh, you're depreciated out at that point, right?
Yes.
Down near zero or something.
Right. And then how much do you invest in a man who's now a paraplegic? Punch that into your computer. How much do you invest in someone who is refusing smart meters? Punch that in your computer. It's all being run by computers, and they're giving value to every living human on the planet. They've been doing this. Gosh, I don't know if you read Silent Weapons for Quiet War.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, well, in the end, they admitted that they're using the game theory, and they're adding a value for each human. At the time, they said for each soldier, they assigned a value, but now with Common Core, they're assigning values at a younger and younger age.
Well, Common Core is also supposed to, among other things, decide where the value for each person is and what job to do, right?
There you see it. There it is, right there. That's right.
And so education is job training.
And they look at the test results, they look at the teacher's notes on the child's behavior, all of that gets dumped into their computer system, and then they make a determination what would be the best value added for this living man or boy or girl. Unbeknownst to the parents, unbeknownst to the child, their goal is to turn everybody into a commercial piece of property. Right. And they've set this thing up so that's been so ongoing for so long that making this transition, what concerns me is as long as we agree to it, making this transition shouldn't be very difficult for them, as long as we're in the dark.
Yeah, exactly. It also brings up the ultimate goal of their program, which is not just perpetually making money. At the top levels, what I've seen is that the goal is complete destruction of the biosphere.
Well, they also...
Extermination of life.
I don't know, they will probably tell you at some point they're going to recover the biosphere because they may have technology to do so. But
they do tell that to the corporate level minions that they have because that keeps them motivated.
Yes. In fact, one individual, they can tell them all kinds of things. We have a vaccine that will protect you and your family, and it may or may not be true. They would probably believe it's true.
Yeah, well, they do have vaccines to stop you from worrying. They destroy certain parts of the brain, and you won't have any more stress. It's really great. Those are coming right up.
Well, and so that's how the deception is how it keeps going. But we all know, and anybody with any common sense, I would hope, although so many people seem to be just ignoring it, that we're being replaced, that employees are being replaced by machines. Right. Just go to the grocery store and check out in the aisle where there's nothing but you and a computer.
Yeah, Walmart has those too.
Now think about what happened to the woman or man who had been running that cash register.
Yeah, they're freed up to have a totally leisure-oriented, wonderful life because they don't have to work anymore.
Right, unemployed.
Yeah, they are also starving, right?
It's called unemployment. And then I say to people, Now go into fast food places, and I tell people this all the time. Now you're done eating. Okay, there's only a couple people behind the counter. Now they have a stand for you to bus your own table. Mm-hmm. So what happened to the employees that used to do the busing?
Yeah.
You're doing it for them for nothing.
Right.
When you fill up your tank and you do it yourself, what happened to all the service station attendants?
Yeah, people nowadays, they may not even believe what service stations used to be. I mean, they haven't even heard the word service station.
That's right.
The gas station.
And then think about taking your groceries out. What happened to the carry out that used to be around and would do that for you? And what about
yeah, exactly. I remember seeing commercials on the television where I think it was black and white TV, and you'd pull in your Chevrolet, seeing the USA, you'd pull into this gas station, and 4 guys that looked like they just ran out of the malt shop with these little hats on and everything. One would check each one of your tires, and they'd check the oil, and they'd ask you if you were having a nice day and all this stuff, and they weren't in a hurry. They would just talk to you indefinitely, and then, you would pay the 10 cents a gallon for the gas and be ready to leave.
Yeah.
Seems to have changed.
Well, and I don't know if somebody has a broken leg or something. I don't know what they do, because you would pay heck at some of these stations to get any service whatsoever.
Yeah.
So people get slowly used to the fact that they've turned us into slave labor. We're doing the labor. Okay? We're not getting paid to do the labor, but we're doing it.
Yeah.
Now, I keep telling everyone the next time you go to fast food, leave your food on the table. Give someone a job.
Oh, yeah, because then they might have to hire somebody. True.
Exactly. If we all stopped doing the busing for them, they would have to hire someone.
Okay, now, one of the problems with that kind of a economic solution, although it's completely sensible, is that there's a little problem that has to be corrected for any of those things to be allowed to work, and that's that there can't be any more central bank.
No question about that.
Because they're taking all the money out of the economy anyway and stealing it, and people don't really understand how that works. But as long as that's not dealt with, right, no other economic solution can succeed.
I totally agree with you. And in fact, people go vote, and people say, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do the other. If you want a big picture solution, you're never going to get one until you get rid of central banks. Never. There will not be a big picture solution.
Yeah, and so if you look at why are central banks there? The Congress in each country, or its equivalent, passed a law that empowered the central bank, and part of that law was that they'd be above the law, right? Nobody could question what they did.
Yes. Did you see the Bernard, what was his name? Ronald Bernard?
Yes.
Videos, and he said exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, one of the central bankers was on mainstream television a few years ago. I'm trying to remember his name. It's that older, bald guy with glasses that... I should remember his name. It just totally went out of my mind. He was saying, well, actually, there's nothing that the federal government can do to question any of our actions because we're not subject to that. And there's
Alan Greenspan.
Alan Greenspan, sorry. And there's no sign that Congress is going to change that arrangement anytime in the foreseeable future.
Right.
How did they get Congress? Well, I guess they just offered him some bribes, right, in 1913 to make a law like that. Even Woodrow Wilson, who ended up signing that law after Congress passed it, later supposedly wrote, when he was, near the end of his life, that he said, I'm a most unhappy man. I've unwittingly destroyed my country.
Yeah, the only way out of this is to get rid of the permanent state of national emergency.
Which Congress could do, right?
Congress claims they can't, but I don't see why they shouldn't. That would be, taking control back. Right now, the executive and all those agencies, and I don't know if I mentioned this last time, Richard, I went to the US Gov website, and I looked up, there's a list of the federal agencies, A, B, C, D.
Okay.
I took the time to count them.
Right.
I went on each page and I counted them. Do you know how many federal agencies there are now? 630.
Whoa, I had no idea. No,
That's six, and they are all over the place. Child support, everything that is part of our life, they have a federal agency in charge of.
Right, and most of them are powers delegated by Congress, which Congress never possessed.
Correct.
Right, and no one gets in trouble.
Well, and as some constitutional attorneys have pointed out, the Constitution never authorized the executive branch to delegate lawmaking.
Oh, yeah, which is what the agencies are doing.
Exactly.
They just call it rules instead of laws.
Correct. So people who keep saying we've got a constitutional solution, they've got to accept the fact the Constitution is not the law of the land in the United States today. What it is Uniform Commercial Code. So if you want to protect yourself and your loved ones, you better learn about, I think it's only 10 pages. You can read 10 pages of UCC general provisions, and you will see the world in which you live. Because
is that basically the laws under UCC?
Yes.
And is it on your website?
Laws of contract. Those are the laws of contract. Everything's a contract. Those are the laws and rules of contracts. So, people say, well, they're taking away my rights, and my answer always is, what did you sign? Right.
So a big part of making it work better is to renegotiate everything that you signed without really understanding what it was, right?
Well, first of all, you have to start restricting your signatures without prejudice. You have to, anything you sign, restrict your signature. Do not sign anything without that, above your name, without prejudice.
See, part of the problem is all these words that have meanings in normal English that have been legally redefined. So there's two languages.
Right.
There's a regular language that everybody thinks they speak in English.
Right.
And prejudice means preconception about something.
Right.
And it just means without. So that means without any preconception of anything, but it doesn't have any legal meaning. But you're saying that the UCC governing structure, whatever it is, has defined terms.
Correct.
And somewhere there must be a dictionary of what those words mean to them.
Okay, now this is I'll read this to you. This is, again, I kind of encourage the listeners to go to, all I have to do is type in UCC-general provisions. And this is part of this notice the condition preceding, the validation of why we're doing it this way. And this is what it says, Section 1-308. Again, this is general provisions. Performance or acceptance under reservation of rights. A party that with explicit reservation of rights performs or promises performance or assents to performance in a manner demanded or offered by the other party does not thereby prejudice the rights reserved. Such words as, quote, without prejudice, unquote, quote, under protest, unquote, or the like are sufficient. Okay? So it's telling you right there, if you don't do that, then they're going to inflict all the implied aspects of whatever contract or agreement that they're asking you to sign.
So would you say that the basic study assignment for people who want to begin to understand UCC laws to read the general provisions?
They could do that, or they could, I just put something together. I will put it up on my website. It is just 3 pages, and these are the validating provisions, rules, regulations codes for our notice of condition precedent, which we talked at length about on the last show. And that's not as cumbersome as the general provisions, although it doesn't hurt to be familiar with the general provisions. It's only 10 pages. You may not understand it all, but you'll get a gist of how this system is functioning.
Okay.
And the very in the very beginning, and the lawyers know this, they somehow believe, the lawyers, that the Constitution still has the Bill of Rights protecting us, and that the UCC is just about commerce. The lawyers don't get it's all commerce.
Right.
Okay?
Right. So how could they have all missed that point?
How could doctors have missed the point that pharmaceuticals are not natural?
Well, it's because of very specifically designed training.
Exactly.
It makes them unaware of it, yeah.
Okay. I mean, I saw a physician's lecture, and they call it new molecular entities. That's a pharmaceutical product that's seeking a patent. It's called a new molecular entity. And you sit back and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, since when was my body created to require a new molecular entity?
Well, I'm noticing that in medicine and dentistry and all the various outgrowths of the medical paradigm, the basic assumption is the body is flawed as it's built by nature or God, and
right.
it's built to fall apart and get torn to pieces by all these evil germs that are in the air, and that if it weren't for modern science and doctors, people would pretty much all die as soon as they're born because we don't have a sterile environment.
Well, how is it that my grandfather lived to be 92 as a farmer and never took any medication?
That was just some kind of a misunderstanding. He actually didn't live very long.
And ate his own food that he grew using manure as fertilizer.
Yeah, he was just incredibly fortunate to avoid all the germs. It doesn't happen very often.
And my grandmother made all the food. It wasn't bought in the grocery store. How is it to live so long?
No, I was talking to a dentist recently, and we were talking about the idea, and they absolutely sincerely believe that if you don't start brushing your teeth, constantly, then what happens is these evil germs, well, it's understood all germs are evil, and it's just a miracle that you live through any of them, but they start making this coating on your teeth called plaque, the purpose of which is to rot all your teeth. And that if you didn't have, I guess originally Mr. Tooth Decay, who's in the tube of Colgate toothpaste, that nobody would have any teeth. And it's just because, the environment's designed to destroy you if it weren't for modern science.
I'm sure they believe that. I'm sure.
I think so. I think a lot of them do.
Okay, so getting back to the general provisions, and this is what, I'd be happy to argue with any lawyer over this any day of the week because it's just in black and white. Mm-hmm. The construction of Uniform Commercial Code to promote its purposes and policies, applicability of supplemental principles of law. A, the Uniform Commercial Code must be liberally construed and applied to promote its underlying purposes and policies, which are 1, to simplify, clarify, and modernize the law governing commercial transactions. 2, to permit the continued expansion of commercial practices through custom, usage, and agreement of the parties. And 3, to make uniform the law among the various jurisdictions. B, unless displaced by the particular provisions of the Uniform Commercial Code, the principles of law and equity, including the law merchant and the law relative to capacity to contract, principal and agent, estoppel, fraud, misrepresentation, duress, coercion, mistake, bankruptcy, and other validating or invalidating cause supplement its provision. It's all contract law.
So that means everything you do is commercial.
Everything. And I read that. Did I not read to people what the definition of commerce was?
Yeah, it includes everything you ever do.
It includes everything.
So
you can see the doctor, and you're nothing more than a healthcare consumer.
Where did this group of general provisions are basically rules or laws, where did it come from?
There is a group of lawyers who have been drafting it, and private group of attorneys drafting it and selling it across the country for many, 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 many years. Excuse me. Okay. And it's justified. They justify it by saying we've got interstate commerce between Ohioans and Pennsylvanians, and therefore we need to have rules that are uniform, and that's how they justify it.
And they probably made believe it would only apply to certain specifically business things. It wouldn't really have much to do with most people's lives.
I think they really believe that. I think they really believe that it doesn't apply to living men and women, although how they can miss the fact that MSNBC refers to us as healthcare consumers is beyond my wildest dreams. How they miss the fact that the personnel department of each company is now a human resource department.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that, right.
Yeah, how can they miss this? I think it's called, it's just too ugly for them to want to look at, really, honestly.
Right. But somebody actually conceived this idea. And you think that was somewhere in the 20th century?
Well, again, if you are in charge of money, remember each contract, for a contract to be valid, there has to be a consideration, right?
Yeah, both sides have to give and get something.
Right. Okay, so now you're the guy who owns the money. You know contracts are consideration is required. You have convinced the world that you should be. Remember what Rothschild said, I don't care who makes the law as long as I can print the currency?
Yeah.
So if you're the guy who can define what money is, then the next step is money's consideration is to make sure that everything is about contract law, which requires consideration. Barter is just something they can't stand.
Right. Yeah, because this is barter with one side giving something that's worthless. In other words, fiat money.
Right. They can't control barter and they hate it.
Yeah.
But it's all about, if we can control money, we can control commerce, we can control the people. We can control food, we can control everything because everybody needs money. And then we go ahead and we make money scarce. We do create the busts and booms. And when money's scarce, people are even more apt to do everything we say because they're practically starving.
Right, which is basically how the 1929 Depression was caused, right?
Yes.
They let out lots and lots of fiat money, and then they shrunk the money supply.
Then they shut it down, exactly.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, people were desperate, businesses went under. In fact, I don't know if you know who Andrew Carrington Hitchcock is. He wrote a wonderful book called Synagogue of Satan. Mm-hmm. And in that, he did the history of the Rothschilds. It's really the story of the Rothschild dynasty. That's what the whole book is. And I was surprised to read that and learn. We know about the Christmas Carol. Remember Dickens and how everybody was poor? Well, that story, Dickens was living in the era of a bust. They had just contracted the money supply, and there were all these poor people. Cratchits and all these people were poor. Then you go back to Victor Hugo's, what was the one in France? I'm trying to think. It was made into a movie. And in France, they did the same thing, and they created all this poverty because it was a bust. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Victor Hugo wrote about that, this horrible era of poverty. And, we were never told why England went into this horrible level of poverty. Why did they have this horrible level of poverty in France? Right. It was the money monsters who did it intentionally.
Yeah, you're just supposed to think it's a normal cycle of nature and it just happens sometimes.
Right. And that's not at all true. That the case is that they create booms and busts, and then they make money plentiful, and everybody's building, everybody's having a great time, they're buying things. Then they make money scarce, they create the bust, and then all of a sudden they get to buy things already made for pennies on the dollar, and the population is left penniless.
Right. Now,
So I see peace on the planet without getting rid of central banking. Do you?
no, I think that would have to be part of it for sure.
Yeah.
And there has to be a general awakening of people that, are not break the hypnosis where everybody feels completely hypnotic and like a slave, and that they need experts to run their lives and things like that. But
Yeah.
you must have gotten into this with the idea not just to expose what was really the corruption and the nature of it, but ultimately what people might be able to do to have some chance of reversing it.
Yes, and I believe that until more people stop volunteering into the system, until more people start, doing what we're talking about, notice the condition preceded, resurrect themselves from the dead, get out from under the presumption that you're a straw man, that you're a dead legal fiction. That can make a big difference. More people need to do that. But in and of itself, Richard, I'm not saying that I think that from a grassroots understanding of this that we can shut the whole thing down. I think we need some kind of universal assistance getting rid of the central banking system. I like to think that's a possibility.
Yeah, I definitely think it is a possibility. I mean, it's based on no reasonable justification to exist at all.
Right.
It was sold to, at least in America, to the people. The idea that it's amazing how they twist words around, but that it would be non-political, right, which has to be wonderful, and that it would prevent instability in the economy. And since it's been it's done just the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, he should have said it's not going to be political, governed by the politicians. It's going to be profiteering, governed by us.
Yeah, exactly, above the politicians. And it would be above the law. And there's a whole structure of central banks controlling almost every country, and all under the Bank of International Settlements, which I think is in Switzerland, right?
Yeah, but if all of the soldiers who have mortgages and have children, and I mean, who's going to protect the banksters? I mean, they could bomb the IMF or the BIS. In other words, we've got enough weapons if we got all the military to wake up, and they could absolutely.
Oh, sure. Well, I think even legally, I mean, when they start threatening things like that, the bankers say, well, we'll just crash the economy, and everybody will be wiped out, and you'll get blamed. And that threat usually is pretty effective.
Jeremy Lee did a wonderful series on what happened in Australia after the Great Depression. And he talked about, and Ellen Brown talks about a national bank, whereas the country, the nation, not private central bank profiteers, whereas the nation prints the money as a right and a resource for the population to use in exchange of goods and services, and they limit the amount of money available. It's not run by profiteers. Jeremy Lee claims that after the Great Depression, Australia was in terrible shape, and they set up a national Australian bank, and it's just great to hear him talk. I think people can probably type in their search engine, YouTube, Jeremy Lee, and listen to his lecture that he gave. They had their own national bank who made money available for projects, for building things, for starting businesses. The interest that the people paid went right back into the bank. Okay, there was not exorbitant rates, but in other words, the profit that was created went right back into the bank to be used to build more. The guy in charge was nothing but an accountant, and that's all he did was do accounting. He didn't get paid a lot of money. all he did was do accounting and pay attention to how much money they were putting into the country to make available. And that's what a national bank does.
You can also have a state bank that does that too, right? Isn't there one in North or South Dakota right now?
Yeah, that's what Ellen Brown is talking about. She's talking about state banks. You could even do it on a county level. I've listened to her talk. You could even do it on a county level where the county would offer money in investments, and the county would receive a nominal amount of interest that the county then would invest back in the county.
Right. Yeah, the corruption is so deep right now that a lot would have to be exposed, because I don't know if you're familiar with the CAFR funds.
Yes.
But it just seems like the banking thing could be done completely differently. It's just, I brought up the issue of the CAFR funds because right now it appears that the cities, counties, and states, being for-profit corporations in whatever configuration they've made them, have taken most of the money that they've gotten from the people, and for an average of the last 70 years or so have been investing it in corporations all over the world, and have this huge nest egg of money that they must be planning to use personally, but they don't put it in the budget.
I've got two different versions of that. Ellen Brown and Walter Burien, who has the CAFR website, they don't agree with each other. And then if you bring in Catherine Austin Fitts, who's just a wonderful, wonderful woman who talks about these counties, these institutional funds. Now, Walter doesn't admit this. He thinks that they invested into big pharma and this, that, and the other. Catherine Austin Fitts says she doesn't think that's what they've done. She thinks what they've done is invested it in these subprime mortgage packages, and that they are, when the truth be known, we're going to see more of them go bankrupt because those obviously failed. Walter doesn't seem to admit that the institutional funds invested heavily into the subprime mortgage mess. Now, I remember Illinois is going under, and you have to wonder, did they take their pension funds and invest them in subprime mortgage trenches?
Well, one of the things that Walter Burien says that's interesting about that is that a state corporation, which is just a corporation, can go bankrupt based on what's on their budget and public records, not on the CAFR funds, which can be totally separate off the books. So they could theoretically go bankrupt when they had a huge surplus of money, and then somebody would end up just getting that.
Yeah, hard to say. I know he's talking about double bookkeeping.
That's this score.
He is. But, at some time, I don't know how that's going to play out, because we do know that the state of Illinois now feels it can't meet its pension obligations. So I would think that there would be attorneys looking at that state and smart enough to look for their investments. And
I hope so. Yeah, I was looking at when California was apparently on the verge of bankruptcy, and it turned out they had $600 million they forgot to mention.
Yeah, now, aren't people going to bring that up if you're saying you can't meet your pension obligations? What are you going to do with this?
Well, if they know about it, yeah.
One of the problems that we ran into, and we brought it up incidentally at a city council meeting, and they were talking about increasing taxes to update the sewer system. And my husband mentioned, I would like to know why you're not using these CAFR account, your investments, to do this.
Wow. Okay, so he told the city that?
Yeah, he did. And they admitted they have these investments. They didn't even deny it. But what they did say, by statutory law, they are limited in what they can do with that money. Now we're back to what statutes were passed that control how they handle that money. I found out in the state of Ohio, and it's probably true across the country, and I don't know if Walter talks about this, but there is a structure for a municipality, and there are rules and regulations that the state has established that obligate these municipalities to do certain things.
I think that's right. And in fact, the municipalities, counties, and cities have legally become subdivisions of the state corporation.
Exactly. So whether or not they can get into those funds most likely is determined by the corporate statutes that have been passed in their city capital governing municipalities. We were getting ready to do the fluoride fight, Richard, and I investigated it and discovered that the state legislature was convinced to pass a fluoride statute in 1970. And it required all municipalities over, I think, 25,000 population fluoridate their water.
Wow.
I checked with a legal group and asked them what I could do about that. And they said, should my municipality even try to stop water fluoridation, they would be sued by the state.
Okay, right.
And the only way we could get fluoride out of any water in the state was to go to the legislatures and get them to revoke that.
And you can figure that they're all being bribed by the companies making the money on the fluoride.
Well, that's what the lawyers said. When they get wind, if you try a campaign like that, all of the companies that are dumping their toxic waste into your water will ascend on your legislature with their lobbyists to prevent you from accomplishing that.
Yeah, exactly. It makes it really challenging to come up with a solution that would work.
It does. But again, I haven't taken it on yet, but the truth be known that there is no statutory law that allows them to harm or injure living men and women. And if I could get people to comprehend that approach to bring ourselves back to life and stop just being this legal, fictitious corporation, opens doors that have not been opened. Sadly, our lawyers aren't going to lead this campaign because they're making a lot of money off of this system.
Yeah.
However, if people start to comprehend, even with the smart meter, there's nothing in the charter for my American Electric Power. There's nothing in their corporate charter which grants them permission to cause me harm or injury as a living woman. Nothing.
Is there anything that prohibits that?
They don't even acknowledge it.
Yeah, they don't rather talk about something else, I'm sure.
Yeah. In other words, they are doing something because we don't understand. They have no authority to cause harm or injury, and going after the executives or the trustees saying, since you have no authority to harm living men and women, and I am a living woman, and I am suffering from this, I am holding you liability. When the executives of these corporations function outside their charter, they then become personally liable. And that's what people don't quite yet get. Yeah,
because they didn't fill their function as a corporate officer correctly according to the law, right?
Yes, when they function outside their corporate charter, right? Right. Now they don't have any protection.
So it's not a constitutional issue, it's a corporate charter issue.
Yes. Yes. And as long as we chase our tail on the hamster wheel of the Constitution, nothing will improve. But should we say to the corporation, American Electric Power, I see no statutory evidence that you have any authority to harm or injure any living woman or man or child. Please provide me such evidence. There will be no evidence that they can harm or injure a living man, woman, or child.
Right.
Because the corporate charter doesn't even recognize men, women, or children. This is the approach that we are hoping more and more people will start to take. This is the approach.
I agree. I mean, the only way there'd be any incentive to change is if it was personally too dangerous for them to keep doing what they're doing.
Exactly. And the same thing is across the board. once people understand all of this is written for that legal person, no corporate charter authorizes them to harm or injure a living man, woman, or even a dog.
Right.
Because corporate charters are business models. They have nothing to do with living things.
I guess for public companies, corporate charters can be read, right?
Every corporation has its charter in the Secretary of State's office.
Okay, so even private ones you could read.
I believe that if you file a Freedom of Information Act, because it's filed on the state, it is now, the state is the one that grants the corporate charter. People don't understand it. The state owns the charter. The state can withdraw the charter if it chooses.
Okay, and government agencies, being corporations also, it seems that they would be in that category too, wouldn't they?
Well, yeah. I mean, basically.
I mean, even courts are corporations now.
Essentially, what they have concluded is when you get a business together, you and your family, you and your friends, you have this business, you're gonna get incorporated. And I know people smart enough to avoid that. Mm-hmm. When you get incorporated in the state, you're basically giving your company to the state.
Right, okay. Well, people think there's no safe way to do it except to do that.
Lawyers have convinced him. I have a wonderful friend in California who has a business. Some lawyer tried to convince them that they should incorporate. They looked at the information and they decided not to. That was the smartest thing she ever did. Because now comes all these rules and regulations that the state inflicts on corporations. None of them apply to her.
Right. Well, some people are worried that if you don't incorporate, then all the responsibility for the company is on you personally.
Yes. And is that a problem if you're conducting an honorable business?
No, it's just been, everybody's been, trained that, well, everyone knows that's terrible.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not so terrible.
They want out from under the liability. They want to no longer be held accountable.
Yeah.
And that is right in the very beginning of that documentary, The Corporation. They bring that up. Some lawyer is talking to a man and he's saying, well, if you don't want to be personally liable, let's do this. Let's incorporate, and then you will no longer be liable. And that was the birth of the corporation, to eliminate accountability and liability to people who wanted to make money but wanted to protect their personal finances. Well, they went out and created havoc across society.
Right. So again, where is that video if people want to watch it? Because it sounds pretty interesting.
They can do a search in their search engine and type in YouTube-The Corporation. And I recommend it. It's entertaining. It's well done. The guy in Canada, he just did an excellent job. And he just put it all together. It's just amazing. And they talk about the corporation is a psychopath. And that one section, if you would define what a psychopath is, corporations meet that definition.
Well, there's no sense of ethics or morality, right?
Yeah, they don't care about people. They only care about money. They don't care about harming people. They don't care. In other words, if you were going to use the rules or the concepts that we have put together to define what a psychopath is on a living man, and take that definition and apply it to a corporation, you would see very quickly that they're psychopathic. Right. It's the worst thing. The worst invention on the planet to me at this point is the corporation.
If what you said is true, that we can't really solve this issue without getting rid of the Federal Reserve, and that depends on somehow getting people in Congress that are not corrupted. In the meantime, even though maybe it can't all be solved, from what you've learned so far, what do you think people can do to make things at least better and improve their situation and security and things like that?
Well, I'm hoping that they will do one of two things, because to not volunteer into this system, to finally understand they're doing what they're doing because they have no guilt, because we are volunteering. They trick us into volunteering, but we are volunteering with our signature. We are volunteering every day. And to understand how not to volunteer and at least say no, don't consent. But you have to figure out how you're consenting, because you're being tricked, before you can figure out how to stop consenting.
Take the example in California that now they want to inject poison into all your kids to make sure they stay healthy before they go to school.
The first thing I would tell people is, I know what you're going to tell them: get them out of the school, because Common Core is all over there, you know?
Well, yeah, exactly. School's getting too dangerous even if they avoid the vaccines.
Right, and I'm not so sure we shouldn't just stop there, Richard, because the schools are setting up clinics, and they plan on they have the authority to vaccinate young girls. They did that, I think, in year 2012.
Yeah, with the girl's signature.
Yes, so I don't see how any child in public school in California is going to be safe.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the model for the rest of the country to follow as soon as they can.
And then the second thing is, don't register your child for homeschool. You're going to homeschool, do not register. Okay?
Yeah, how does that work? Is there a department within the state government that wants you to sign up for permission to...
Oh, yeah. In fact, the lawyers will tell you, many people, I think even the homeschool groups will tell you, oh, you have to register to be a homeschool.
Yeah, because they have a special rule and they say it's okay.
Correct. If you register your child for homeschool, then they're going to want to take their homeschool regulations and inflict them on you.
Well, they're also saying if you don't do that, you have truancy laws that go into effect.
So the question is, then we're back to this notice of condition precedent. We're back to that. It's so simple. I talked about it last time. It is like zero risk. You don't have to use it until you want to, but on the notice, not only do you claim that you're not a citizen of the United States, that you're a living flesh and blood woman or man, the very last section, we take back our children, and the very second to the last paragraph says, let it be known to all that this notice also serves to amend my son's certificate of live birth and rebut any presumption that the state has parental authority, parentheses, parents patriae, unparentheses, over Jimmy John Doe, date of birth 5708.
Okay, well,
this presumption is still in place, will remain in place until you rebut it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They consider themselves, you registered the baby when you signed the certificate of live birth. The presumption went in place that at that point, the state can control the child. Excuse me, but it's a presumption. Until you rebut it, it will stand. But when you rebut it, then the presumption's gone, and you're saying, I did not do that. I did not give state authority over my child.
Right, because it's again a question of words. Registration, we have been taught, just means putting your name down somewhere to keep track of.
Right.
But registration in the legal sense, the commercial code sense, means you're giving jurisdiction over whatever you're registering to the agency that's requiring it, right? And
you're agreeing to all their rules, right?
Yeah. It's like signing the terms of service.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And I don't even think lawyers know that. I think they sign the certificate of live birth. Now, you can get around this. People say, well, don't sign a certificate of live birth. And what we're saying is they're going to give you a real hard time if you don't, so just sign it without prejudice.
Yeah.
I mean, sign it without prejudice. Always sign everything without prejudice So when they come around, then you can demand a copy of the contract saying, what did I agree to? Now, this wonderful article, and this is what this author, you can find this article at, I think, freedomlaw.com. The author titled the article, How to Free Yourself from Legal Tyranny. But here's what he had to say about without prejudice. When you use without prejudice, and today it's UCC 1-308, in connection with your signature, you are saying, quote, I reserve my right not to be compelled to perform under any contract or commercial agreement that I did not enter knowingly, voluntarily, and intentionally.
So if people are interested in learning how to make use of the new kind of signature and other ways to withdraw from agreements that are not good for them, and they go to your site and they see this overwhelming amount of information to absorb there, what's a good, reasonable place to start, and how do you negotiate through that?
I would start them at notice of condition. If you look at the website, there's topics at the top that are listed. There's four, five. Now there's 5 rows.
Okay.
In the second to the last row is notice of condition preceding. Okay. All they have to do is click on that, and we've done our best to explain what this is all about. The booklet that you and I talked about, Are You Legally Alive or Dead? It's free. Okay. They can click on that. It's short. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. This is not long, not tiny print. It's easy.
Right. Good.
And they can read about that and kind of start to get an understanding of how the system works and how they can stop volunteering to be victimized by it. And again, as you said, it's coming from the central banking cartel. At some point, when we get rid of central banking, we can start unraveling all of this. But meanwhile, in my opinion, it's our duty and our obligation to make sure that we are not volunteering into this insanity.
Yeah. Okay. Well, listen, since we're wrapping things up now and we're almost out of time, let's make a quick transition to another area that you've been, I think, very much focused on as well, because it has other possibilities if we learn how to use it. And that has to do with consciousness and with the audio clip that I wanted to play that you gave us for the very conclusion of this discussion. So what do you need to tell people to appreciate what that clip means and how to see it and hear it?
I just think it means so much. I've seen it true in my own life. People don't understand the power that they have, the power that we give to this system merely by our thoughts and our fears, and imagining a world. And I said this on the show, people pray, we call it a prayer. There's more than one way to pray. You can pray in church, you can say prayers, but the universe can recognize image prayers. That's not any language. It's not Swedish. It's not Spanish. It is real life images. And imaging the beauty of the planet and a joyful future for our children is a powerful tool. Doing that regularly is something that you can enjoy, and do it multiple times a day, 1 time a week, whatever you want. And that's why we put together this prayer, to help people understand the power of their thoughts.
And if they listen to the audio clip, which doesn't have words, it's just music, is there an imaging process that they do while they're listening to that?
I believe it's right on the clip. I don't know if you listened to it. I think I gave instructions in the beginning.
Oh, okay. Okay. Hopefully. So. I wasn't sure if that was included or not. That's
yeah, it should be.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. All right. Well, That's a huge amount to absorb, and I think that there's a lot of things in there that could be helpful to people and just educational about that what's going on around us is not exactly what appears on the surface. And to, have the best experience during this time that we can requires to be awake and to do some studying and learning. And it's not a bad thing. Once you get used to it, it's actually pretty interesting.
Well, and that's where the solutions lie, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see where it goes. We also gave, enough information for the basis of many future discussions. So maybe we'll get to have another episode before too long, too.
That would be great.
Yeah. So, okay, hold on. We'll say goodbye in the break, and we'll let people listen to the clip here.
We'd like to end tonight's show by reaching up to a higher power, whatever that might mean to you, to assist us in creating the future we all want. Close your eyes as you listen to this beautiful song by Inca Gold called Shout to the Lord, and image families and children enjoying Earth's healthy meadows, forests, oceans, and mountains in perpetuity. Image them laughing, singing, and dancing. Visualize humanity thriving, free from want or fear. Picture the peaceful world we all deserve. Let's joyfully create our future together.
Okay, so that was Whitney, guys. Not too much to add. That was an incredible discussion, I thought. Make sure and go to her website. It's really good. www.anticorruptionsociety.com. And that last piece that we prayed, that last piece, yeah, we did. We played Prayer for Humanity. That's on one of the tabs on our website. It's really good. You can listen to it repeatedly if you want to. That's what it's made for. And I really agree with her, I have to say, on the magnitude of the situation that we're in and the need for education, which she's helping to provide. But I also agree that consciousness itself is the ultimate option that we have, the one, really the only one that's going to work at this point. There's so much momentum behind the negative power structures, programs, and the agendas that they're really proud of, and that they're going to eventually realize are not a good idea, but they don't realize that yet. So I'm not saying to stop your physical work, do that too, but the real work is inside, and it changes the impact of your physical work dramatically, and it changes the impact of it, even of what you say, on other people if you do that internal work. And it even changes the behavior of other people. It's pretty miraculous, and we've had people reporting that that's happening to them. On the Saturday show, you should come and listen in or talk to us on that show. That's a call-in show for discussion of these things. And we talk about specifics of how to do the consciousness approach, and you can join us if you feel like it. You find out that there really is a bright future, in spite of the impossibility that seems to be when you just look at world events. But regardless of how things going, there's something really good. And I'm not talking about philosophy or religion here. I'm talking about something you have in your hands right now, but just need to be reminded about how to open it up and use it. So that's what we talk about on Saturday. If you want to come over, because, it's good to get educated about what's going on in the world if you don't let it upset you too much, because that doesn't do anything good. But then once you learn that there are some issues that we have to deal with, what you really need to focus on is solutions. And the main one, as counterintuitive as it may seem, is inside you. And you're the most incredible person in this game and in this play that you're the star of. I'm not talking to everybody else, just you. So if that's the case, which it is, your main responsibility is to get back in touch with that. Wake yourself up. And that waking up, I don't mean in the sense of being able to recite what's wrong in the world or the most amazing conspiracy. That's not waking up. That's just intellectually learning what's going on a little bit. Waking up is becoming aware of yourself on a level that you're not used to. And what is hidden there is much more powerful. So anyway, come talk to us on Saturday night, same time of day as this one, 6 o'clock p.m. Pacific time, 9 o'clock Eastern U.S. time. All the archives for that show and the Sunday show are available free at lostartsradio.com. And so remember to go and take a look at both of our sites in addition to Al Whitney's site. Ours are lostartsradio.com and lostartsresearchinstitute.org. And sign up for the free newsletter if you'd like to. It's information about upcoming shows, other things that I'm wanting to share with you. And there's a new Facebook group that was started by one of our listeners, Emily. You should go there and sign up for it and participate. So she's got some company, and we do have people signing up, but we need a few million more. So hope you'll show up over there and add your input. There's also a user forum that Doug set up on lostartsradio.com that's pretty neat. So use that if you'd like to. It's kind of a good way to communicate. And let me see, what else am I forgetting? Oh, there's donate buttons. If you have money, if you're struggling for survival, please do not donate to us. But if you have funds that you can afford to share, then we really need the support. We're doing a lot of hours with no income from it. I'm trying to fix that. There's no virtue in having no money. It's just the situation right now. And there will be a series of books coming out that may help us to raise funds, but we need assistance if you have discretionary funds. Otherwise, if you don't, just tell other people about the show, and that would be great. We're also in the process of looking for safe sources of funding for the school, which is a big project. That's lots of money, but if it comes from a source where there are no bad strings attached, and maybe some kind of a philanthropist or organization that wants to do some good for humanity and feels in harmony with what we have in mind and the plans that are already ready to go. Actually, we have people moving on this already, even though the funding is not there yet. Just knowing that if it's meant to happen, funds will show up. So the main thing, though, is the transmission of the information, and not just memorizable information, but experiential information, where you reconnect to some amazing source of energy and awareness and consciousness that's inside yourself. That is what affects everything else on the outside. It can revolutionize relationships where it doesn't look possible. It can change other people's behavior without them even knowing they're changing. It's pretty amazing. It's beyond magical in a good way. So come and share those ideas with us, and we'll let you know what we're talking about. In the meantime, have a great week, and hope everything goes really well for you. I appreciate you very much sharing your time with us. Thanks for being a part of this project, and I'll see you next time.
Listen to our new shows with guests every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. All new shows and archives are available at blogtalkradio.com/Lost Arts Radio. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Lost Arts Radio. We're on Twitter at Lost Arts Radio. Our YouTube channel is youtube.com/C/Lost Arts Radio. Again, youtube.com/C/Lost Arts Radio. And scene.life, we're at Lost Arts Radio/profile. When you do your Amazon shopping, please use Amazon's Smile program at smile.amazon.com. And when you choose Lost Arts Research Institute in Sedona, Arizona as your charity, Amazon will donate 0.5% of whatever your order total is to Lost Arts Research Institute to help fund the building of the school and keep our radio show on the air. Please visit lostartsresearchinstitute.org for more information on the school we want to build. Be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter on our site under the Radio Show tab, or right from the button on our Facebook page. You're also invited to join our free user forum on our website at lostartsradio.com. You can ask Richard a question there or post about any subject that you're interested in. Our forum is growing, and we'd love to have you be part of that community. We keep it troll-free, so don't worry about others, paid or otherwise, speaking negatively or engaging in some sort of debunking tactic fakery. I closely monitor the forum for abuse, and we have a very strict one-strike-and-you're-out policy, which is why we require you to register your email address along with whatever screen name or username you want to use. We also have links to all of the great independent musicians whose music we feature each week on Lost Arts Radio. And if you like Lost Arts Radio, please consider donating a few bucks to help keep us on the air. We spend many, many hours each week to bring you the best show we can with the best guests around. You can find our donate button on our website at lostartsradio.com. Contact Richard at richard@lostartsradio.com or myself, Doug Diamond, at doug@lostartsradio.com. Thanks again for listening to Lost Arts Radio, and we'll see you again next week.
Oh, you want me to be perfect one. It's so easy to see why I push you away. inside my heart and hell in front of me. Oh, I walk the endless miles to where I need to be, and it's all the same. We're holding out for change. Yeah, our world is a mess. The planet's in distress. Oh, and everyone's so afraid of making mistakes. With heaven above our heads and hell below our feet. Oh, I walk for countless miles to a tune that pushes me, and it calls out my name. Oh, it's time for a change. Yeah, it's time for a change. Oh, you say I've done you wrong, still you wrote me this song. Now still you stay away. You haven't called me for days. With heaven inside my heart and hell in front of me. Oh, I walk the endless miles to where I need to be, and we're all the same. Oh, now we're holding out for change, and now we're holding out for change. Oh, it's time for a change.